Today's lecture is going to be on the process of reward, which can lead to addiction, of course, in some cases. But what is it that helps us experience pleasure, and how is stress related to that? So let's get going with our Chapter 16 notes, which is called Junkies, Adrenaline Junkies, and Pleasure. So, set up our slideshow. And we're going to be talking a little bit about tickling on this particular lecture, which might sound a little strange, but it ties into some major concepts in terms of, you know, excitement, why you keep engaging in certain things, and how predictability plays a huge role. And this idea of predictability should resonate with you by now, because I brought it up in a few different lectures and talked about it, discussed it as a modulator of stress. And so, starting out, Sapolsky says you can't tickle yourself, even with a tickle machine. And why not? The deal is there is predictability and a sense of control. Wow, that ties exactly in with the last couple of lectures. To be tickled, there must be an element of surprise. And I must go on a side note here, because I have never found tickling to be a pleasurable experience. I think back to when I was young, very young, and I had a great uncle who thought it was just hysterical to chase me around and tickle me, digging into my rib cage. Digging into somebody's rib cage, going like this is not fun. It is not tickling. It is not tickling. If you are the recipient, apparently it's a lot of fun for some people who want to do it to you. And I still remember, you know, him coming and me start running around like, oh no, and him chasing after me going, oh no, thinking it was so funny. And I'm like, oh, I hate this so much. Never really enjoyed the quote tickling, unquote. But anyway, the idea is I was not surprised, because I could predict this is what he was going to do to me. And I had no sense of control whatsoever, because he was way bigger than me. And it was not pleasurable. But let's think about this for a minute. We pay good money to be stressed, right? I mean, think about it. And usually if this was synchronous right now, I would be asking some of you for your ideas, what you pay for to be stressed. But let me, from my recollections, bring up a few. First off, things like going to an amusement park and riding a roller coaster, or bungee jumping. Oh my God, I can't even watch anybody doing that without me feeling very stressed. Haunted houses. It is my nephew and my brother, for several years in a row, turned their very big barn into this amazing haunted house. We had tons of people that would go there, and they collected money, just donations, to go to a particular charity to do it. But I even knew kind of what was in there. And still, once I got stuck in these little areas, little dark areas with crazy things and people who I didn't know were people in costumes and lights and this, and I would get disoriented and somebody would be turning me around. I'd be like, okay, I'm stressed. And then it would kind of break a little when all of a sudden somebody would look out from underneath one of the tables that was draped with a white sheet, because it was a gross surgery table. And somebody goes, hi, Aunt Sue, and they go back under. That helped me come back to earth for a little bit. But anyway, people pay a lot of money to do that. Another thing that somebody would almost every class say is to go to college. Your college education costs a ton of money, and I know that. And you get stressed. I know that too. So think about it for a minute. What is it that you actually pay money to do for the thrill of the stress that you experience? So, and here's another question. Why do some people find stress and risk-taking to feel so great that they get addicted to that? Well, first, just for a couple of minutes, a little tiny baby lesson again on the neurochemistry of pleasure. Don't get worried because this is very straightforward, very mini lecture on neurochemistry. The pleasure neurotransmitter is dopamine. Remember, dopamine is like, oh, dopamine, dopamine, dopamine. Provides motivation. It helps provide that reward feeling. Dopamine, yeah, dopamine. So there we go with dopamine's voice. And the pleasure pathway itself begins in the ventral tegmentum, sometimes referred to as VTA for ventral tegmental area. You might want to indicate that in your notes. And that is the bed of some of the dopamine cell bodies that project to the area of the nucleus accumbens. The nucleus accumbens, which is associated with aspects of the limbic system, emotion, motivation, and so on. Then to the frontal cortex. And then from there, we have a circuit that continues to the anterior cingulated cortex. We've talked a little bit about that before. And the amygdala. And hopefully you all know really well by now what the amygdala does, what stimulation of the amygdala can do. So that is, so far we've got the pleasure neurotransmitter being dopamine, and that pleasure pathway starting in the VTA of the midbrain, where dopamine cell bodies live, and then send projections again to the nucleus accumbens, the frontal cortex, anterior cingulated cortex deeper, and the amygdala. Wolfram Schutz, I like saying that name. He trained a monkey to press a lever 10 times in response to a bell, the sound of a bell. And that led in, like within 10 seconds, like 10 seconds after that lever pressing 10 times the reward of food. Okay, so activation of the dopamine pathway causes the frontal cortex to become much more active around the time of the bell and the beginning of the task. Interesting, right? And we can measure that, we can see that because of the ability to implant electrodes in certain areas of the brain and see where the activity is occurring on the instrument in which we can watch the activity and record the activity. The period of anticipation or expectation is referred to as the appetitive stage. Think about, oh, I have an appetite for this, appetitive stage. And during this period of anticipation or expectation, it's like, oh, this is going to be great. This is going to be great. The pleasure is in the anticipation of the reward. You may not have ever thought of it that way. Some of you, I think, are taking the course about addiction. And I presume that some of this is dealt with in that course, others may not. So I think it's important that we talk about it. You are working for a reward. You are putting in effort and working for a reward. Whoops. And so that is an important, I didn't finish what I wanted to say, and that is an important part of this whole process. So we start seeing these particular areas becoming more active then. So the period that commences with the reward, or the consummatory stage, is separate from the appetitive stage. So if you know your appetite is going to be sated or satisfied, that's a good word, sate is good. It comes from the same roots that satisfaction come from. Pleasure is more about the appetite than the actual sating, if you will. Dopamine and the pleasurable anticipation is the fuel for the work you have to do. One of the reasons where I refer to dopamine as a motivator neurotransmitter, and because it is in the circuit, it can motivate to achieve the end result, although so much of that pleasure is in the anticipation that drives the motivation. Paula Phillips actually found out that a burst of dopamine, the biggest burst of dopamine, comes just before the behavior. All right. So it's like, oh, Belle, I know if I do this, I'm going to get something I love. Big burst of dopamine helps provide that motivating fuel, if you will, to engage in the behavior that earns you your reward. So the strength of these pathways can change. Now, this is a really super important concept. So now let's say the light comes on, there's that burst of dopamine because when the light comes on, or a bell comes on, or whatever. And Paula Phillips, she actually used more a light. It doesn't matter, the stimulus, okay? The stimulus comes on, the animal's trained. When this happens, I do X, Y, Z, and press this lever that's here for me 10 times. Then once that stimulus comes on, we have that burst of dopamine, which again, I'm trying to really reinforce this concept, that dopamine fuels the behavior then that follows. The longer the interval is between the light and the reward, dopamine fuels ever increasing lever pressing. For example, let's say instead of like 5 seconds or 10 seconds, starts to be 20 or 30 seconds before the reward actually arrives. Guess what? We have more dopamine, and it's like, wait a minute, okay, 10 times. Wait. Maybe I'll do it some more. Where is my reward? The gratification postponement works because the core of goal-directed behavior is expectation. Examples, think about grades. I mean, in terms of your grades, yeah, you try to achieve well on your assignments, your assessments, and you may find out your individual grades for those immediately or nearly immediately, but you don't know your final grade for the course or your overall GPA for the semester, or ultimately graduating. Your expectation is, if I do this and I do a good job, I'll need to wait to see the ultimate reward, but I'm going to keep engaging in these behaviors to achieve that reward. Think about in a job, it would be lovely if every day you went to work and before you leave, you're handed X amount of dollars. Hey, here you go. Here's your money for the day. That doesn't happen in too many places. Maybe if you work in some kind of job where you get a tip, you go home with some, but trust me, most of us don't have that, and you wait 2 weeks. Another, think of some other examples. I'm sure you can where you have this. And it's this gratification postponement that can make a difference. But how you respond to that makes the ultimate difference. Okay, so Schultz, Wolfram, good, I like saying that name. Wolfram had a signal. Now here we go again, going back to the signal. I want to move myself up out of the way. Signal, and then has the task performance, and then that leads to the reward, right? Okay, so let's take away the reward every so often. At first you're like, okay, I should be getting a reward. Oh my gosh, it's not coming. Oh, it's not coming. Oh, it's not coming. So everything stops. Just picture this scenario. Now here comes that signal again. It's like, let me do my behavior. Let me perform my task. Oh yes, I'm getting my reward. I'm getting my reward. Next time, signal. I'm performing my task. Where's my reward? Huh. Okay, here comes the signal again. I'm performing, oh yes, my reward. And then start taking away. There is a high probability of a reward instead of a definitive reward. And this has to it the element of surprise. You have an expectation, but it's not certain. And in some cases, I have a kitty trying to come in and join us. Come here, kitty. Excuse me. Silas, come here, Michelle. Come here. That's how I talk to my kitties. Sorry you had to hear that. Anyway, the door would have kept creaking, so it's like somebody knocking at the classroom door. You just have to do something about it. Anyhow, so that element of surprise actually helps further cement the behavior. You get an even greater release of dopamine when there is the element of surprise. So right after the task is completed, dopamine actually starts to rise even higher. Then you have this peaking right around the time the reward, if it is going to actually happen, should arrive. And remember, it doesn't always. This process, hopefully most of you are aware of, is referred to as intermittent reinforcement. And actually, that particular technique is utilized in things like dog training, okay? And you actually can cement a behavior into being more, sure in terms of the animal's response. For example, you might start training a dog to sit. Okay, sit, use your signal, and a reward with a morsel, some kind of treat, whatever your dog likes a lot, because that's going to encourage the behavior to occur. And every time says, now let's start asking the dog to sit. Don't give him a treat. Just go, you know, good. You should always say, good sit, good boy, good girl, whatever. And then next time, and then start not treating every other time, but maybe every fifth time. Okay, intermittent reinforcement. Rats can still respond to reward even when dopamine is depleted. We have seen that in rat research. It's a little much easier to do that in like an animal like a rat because you can do things to deplete the dopamine. We're not going to do that with humans, right? But the question remains, they'll still work. Maybe not so hard, maybe not so efficiently, but they still will respond to reward to some extent. The thought is it's likely opioids that are being released, and that should make you think about something right now in terms of opioid use, dopamine, and if you have both of them going on, just putting that thought out there for you to ponder. Okay, rats can still respond to reward, again, as I said, to some extent. Is it exactly the same extent? Maybe not.